The white dress hung perfectly on the door. The flowers were arranged, and 300 guests were already seated in the chapel. But as I stood there in my childhood bedroom, still in my robe at 2 p.m., staring at 17 missed calls from my wedding planner, I knew something was terribly wrong. My father had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a crumpled note on the kitchen counter. What I didn't expect was the phone call that would change everything from someone I never imagined would be there for the most important day of my life. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Julia, and this is the story of how my wedding day became both the worst and most incredible day of my life. Growing up in Sacramento, California, I always dreamed of walking down the aisle with my father by my side. Robert Hendricks wasn't perfect. He worked long hours at the construction company and often missed school events, but he was my dad. When I got engaged to Marcus, my college sweetheart, Dad seemed genuinely excited. He insisted on paying for half the wedding, despite our family's modest means. The months leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind. Marcus and I had chosen St. Catherine's Chapel, a beautiful stone church downtown with stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the altar. We'd booked the Riverside Gardens for the reception, with its sprawling oak trees and string lights that would look magical at sunset. Everything was falling into place. Dad had been acting strange the week before the wedding, though. He'd become withdrawn, spending hours on phone calls behind closed doors. When I asked him about it, he'd wave me off, saying it was just work stress. Mom had passed away 4 years earlier from cancer, so it was just the two of us navigating this together. I attributed his odd behavior to the emotional weight of giving away his only daughter. The morning of my wedding, October 15th, started beautifully. I woke up early in my childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains Mom had sewn when I was 12. My bridesmaids, Sarah and Emma, arrived at 9 with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. We spent the morning doing our hair and makeup, laughing and sharing memories. Around noon, I realized I hadn't seen Dad since breakfast. He'd been quiet during his morning coffee, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate without eating much. When I called out for him, there was no response. Sarah found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Dad's familiar scrawl on the back of an electric bill envelope. "Julia, I'm sorry. I can't face this. Take care of yourself. Dad." The world stopped. My legs gave out and I sank onto the kitchen linoleum, still in my silk robe with hot rollers in my hair. Sarah was reading the note over and over, as if the words might change. Emma was frantically calling Dad's cell phone, which went straight to voicemail every time. The wedding was in 4 hours. 300 guests, including Marcus's entire extended family who had flown in from Texas. The photographer was arriving in an hour, the flowers had already been delivered to the church, the caterers were setting up at the reception venue. I called Marcus, my voice breaking as I tried to explain. He rushed over immediately, still in his pajama pants, his groomsmen trailing behind him looking confused and concerned. We spent the next hour calling everyone we could think of, Dad's coworkers, his brother in Phoenix, even his old fishing buddies. No one had seen him or knew where he might have gone. The worst part wasn't just that he'd left, it was the timing. He'd waited until the very last moment, when it was too late to postpone or cancel without massive financial loss and public humiliation. The deposit on the venue was non-refundable, the flowers were already arranged. Guests were probably already getting dressed. My mind raced through possibilities. Had he been drinking again? He'd struggled with alcohol after Mom died, but had been sober for 2 years. Was there some family secret I didn't know about? Financial trouble he'd been hiding? The construction company had been struggling lately, and I knew he'd been stressed about work. Sarah suggested we call the police, but what would we tell them? That my father had left a note saying he couldn't face my wedding? He was an adult who'd made a choice, however devastating that choice was. As 2 p.m. approached, I sat on my bed in my wedding dress, a simple but elegant A-line with delicate lace sleeves that had taken me months to find. The dress felt like a costume now, a cruel joke.
I couldn't stop thinking about walking down that long aisle alone, facing all those expectant faces, having to explain that my father had simply decided not to show up for the most important day of my life. Marcus sat beside me, holding my hand while I cried mascara streaks down my cheeks. His parents had driven up from Los Angeles and were handling logistics, calling the church, coordinating with the wedding planner, trying to figure out if we should postpone or forge ahead. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, with a Los Angeles area code. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a vendor or someone calling about the wedding chaos, but something made me pick up. Julia, this is David Chen. I nearly dropped the phone. David Chen? David Chen? The Academy Award-winning actor who'd star in action movies throughout the 2000s and had recently transitioned into directing critically acclaimed dramas. He was also my godfather, though I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 3 years.
Mom and David had been college roommates at UCLA before he made it big in Hollywood. When I was born, Mom asked him to be my godfather, and he'd taken the role seriously throughout my childhood. He'd send birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and would visit whenever he was filming nearby. But as his career exploded and my family stayed in Sacramento, our contact had dwindled to occasional holiday texts. "David," I managed to say through my tears, why are you calling?" "Your father called me 2 hours ago," he said, his familiar voice gentle but serious. "He told me what happened, Julia, where he went and why he left. I'm driving up from LA right now. I'll be there in 45 minutes. I couldn't process what he was saying. Dad had called David Chen? Why would he do that instead of talking to me? "I don't understand," I whispered. "Your dad is at a motel in Stockton. He's in a bad place right now, sweetheart. There are some things about your mother's medical bills and the wedding expenses that you don't know about. He's been drowning in debt and was too proud to tell you. Today just broke something in him." The pieces started falling into place. The secretive phone calls, the stress, the way he'd insisted on paying for the wedding despite our family's financial situation. He'd probably taken out loans or gotten behind on bills, trying to give me the wedding he thought I deserved. "But David, the wedding is in 2 hours. Everyone's already at the church. I can't walk down that aisle alone." "You're not going to walk alone," he said firmly. "If you'll have me, I'd be honored to walk you down that aisle. Your mother would never forgive me if I let her daughter face her wedding day without family by her side." I started crying again, but this time they weren't tears of abandonment and humiliation. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and something I couldn't quite name. In my darkest moment, when I felt completely alone, someone had stepped up. Someone who remembered the little girl who used to show him her school art projects and beg him to tell stories about movie sets. "Are you sure?" I asked. "You don't have to do this." "Julia, I've been your godfather for 24 years. This is exactly what I'm supposed to do." David arrived exactly when he promised, pulling up in a sleek black Tesla that looked completely out of place in our middle-class Sacramento neighborhood. I watched from my bedroom window as he stepped out, wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Even in crisis mode, he looked like he'd stepped off a red carpet. But when he walked through our front door and saw me in my wedding dress with puffy eyes and smudged makeup, all that Hollywood polish melted away. He opened his arms, and I collapsed into them like I was 7 years old again, crying into his expensive suit jacket. "We're going to fix this," he whispered, stroking my hair the way he used to when I'd scraped my knee or had nightmares during his visits. "Your mom is watching today, and she's going to see her daughter get married surrounded by love." The next hour was a blur of activity. David took charge with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations on film sets. He coordinated with Marcus's parents, spoke directly with the wedding planner, and somehow managed to delay the ceremony by 30 minutes without causing panic among the guests. While Sarah and Emma repaired my makeup and hair, David made phone calls. I could hear fragments of conversations, something about his publicist, discreet security, and keeping this private.
I realized that having David Chen at my wedding was going to create its own complications, but he seemed to have everything under control. "Your father loves you," David said when we had a quiet moment alone. "What he did today, leaving like that, it's not about you or your worth. He's drowning in debt from your mother's final hospital bills and the loans he took out for this wedding. The shame became too much." He explained that Dad owed over $60,000 in medical debt that insurance hadn't covered. Mom's final months had involved experimental treatments and specialist consultations that Dad had insisted on, determined to save her no matter the cost. After she died, he'd been making minimum payments while working overtime to stay afloat. Then, when I got engaged, Dad had wanted to give me the wedding Mom would have planned. He'd taken out a second mortgage and borrowed against his retirement fund to pay for the venue, catering, and flowers. But this week, the construction company had laid off half their crew due to a major contract falling through. Dad was facing unemployment with crushing debt and no way to dig himself out. "He called me because your mother made him promise years ago that if anything ever happened to both of them, I would step in for major moments in your life. He remembered that promise and knew he couldn't leave you completely alone today, even if he couldn't face being here himself."
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The revelation was devastating and relieving simultaneously. Dad hadn't abandoned me out of indifference or cruelty. He'd been suffocating under financial pressure and shame. It didn't excuse leaving me on my wedding day, but it explained the inexplicable. "Can we help him?" I asked. "Already handled," David said simply. "I've transferred money to pay off his debts. He'll have a job on my next film's construction crew if he wants it. But right now, he needs professional help to deal with the depression and anxiety that led to this moment." I stared at him, speechless. David Chen had just casually solved my family's financial crisis like it was ordering coffee. The money that had been destroying my father's mental health for years was pocket change to someone with David's wealth. "Why?" I whispered. "We haven't even talked regularly. I'm just your friend's daughter." His expression grew serious. "Julia, when your mom was dying, she made me swear that I would always be there for you. She said the distance didn't matter, that family isn't about geography or frequency of contact. It's about showing up when it matters most." He pulled out his phone and showed me a text he'd sent to Dad. "She's safe. The wedding is happening. Get help. Come home when you're ready." Dad had responded with just 2 words: "Thank you." As we prepared to leave for the church, David's assistant arrived with a small security team. I learned that word had somehow leaked about his attendance, and there were already paparazzi gathering outside St. Catherine's Chapel. David's publicist had crafted a statement explaining his presence as a family obligation, keeping the details private. "I'm sorry about this circus," he said, gesturing toward the security preparations. I tried to keep it quiet. But I found myself laughing for the first time all day. My wedding is about to be photographed by TMZ because my godfather is a movie star. Mom would have found this hilarious. The ride to the church was surreal. David's Tesla followed by 2 black SUVs filled with security personnel, all for a Sacramento wedding that had started as a modest celebration. But David kept me grounded, sharing stories about Mom from their college days that I'd never heard. "She was the only person who could beat me at poker," he said, smiling. Claimed it was because she could read people's souls, not just their faces. She saw through everyone's facades, including mine. When I was just starting out in Hollywood, struggling with rejection and self-doubt, she'd call me every Sunday to remind me who I was underneath all the ambition. When we arrived at the church, I could see the media circus David had warned me about. News vans, photographers with telephoto lenses, and curious onlookers crowded the street. But David's security team had created a clear path from the car to the church entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with whispered excitement. Guests who had come expecting a simple wedding were now part of what would undoubtedly become entertainment news. I caught glimpses of people discreetly taking photos with their phones, despite the no photography request. Marcus was waiting at the altar, looking stunned but relieved.
His best man, Tyler, kept glancing toward the back of the church with an expression of complete bewilderment. The entire wedding party looked like they'd been dropped into an alternate reality. Father Martinez, who had known me since childhood, approached David with starstruck amazement barely contained beneath his professional demeanor. David handled the interaction with grace, thanking him for accommodating the schedule changes and security requirements. As we prepared for the processional, David adjusted his tie and looked at me seriously. "Are you ready for this? Once we walk down that aisle, your wedding becomes public property. Photos will be online within hours." I thought about it for a moment. This wasn't the quiet, intimate ceremony I'd originally planned. My father wasn't here to give me away. The media would probably dissect every detail of my dress, my flowers, my expressions. But Marcus was waiting for me at the altar. David was offering his arm, and 300 people who loved us had gathered to witness our commitment. "Let's do this," I said. The church doors opened, and the first notes of the wedding march began to play. Walking down that aisle with David Chen was unlike anything I could have imagined. The church fell into complete silence, except for the organ music and the subtle sound of camera phones clicking, despite the photography ban. Every face turned toward us, with expressions ranging from joy to shock to barely contained excitement. David walked with the confidence of someone comfortable being watched, but he kept his focus on me. Occasionally, he would lean over and whisper encouragement. "Breathe, sweetheart. You look beautiful. Marcus is the luckiest man alive." Halfway down the aisle, I spotted my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, dabbing her eyes with tissues while simultaneously trying to get a selfie with David in the background. My cousin Jake from Denver was openly recording with his phone, probably already uploading to his social media accounts. The situation was absurd and touching at the same time. When we reached the altar, Marcus stepped forward with tears in his eyes. He shook David's hand and whispered something I couldn't hear, but David nodded solemnly before placing my hand in Marcus's. The simple gesture carried the weight of formal approval, as if he were truly giving me away on behalf of my family. "Take care of her," David said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Father Martinez began the ceremony, but I could feel the underlying current of excitement rippling through the congregation. This was no longer just Julia and Marcus getting married. This was the wedding where David Chen walked the bride down the aisle, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years.
The vows Marcus and I had written seemed even more meaningful in this surreal context. When he promised to stand by me through unexpected challenges and family complications, several people in the audience actually chuckled. When I vowed to love him, even when our lives took dramatic turns we never saw coming, David smiled from his seat in the front row. But the most powerful moment came during the unity candle ceremony. Traditionally, the mothers of the bride and groom light the individual candles that the couple then uses to light the unity candle together. Since Mom had passed away, we had planned for my father to light my candle alone. Without being asked, David rose from his seat and moved toward the altar. He picked up the lighter with reverence, as if he understood the symbolism of the moment. As he lit my candle, he spoke quietly enough that only Marcus, Father Martinez, and I could hear. "This light represents your mother's love, which burns eternal. She's here with us today." The flame flickered to life, and I felt Mom's presence so strongly it took my breath away. Marcus squeezed my hand as we moved together to light the unity candle, symbolizing the joining of our lives and families. When the larger flame ignited, the entire church seemed to exhale collectively. The rest of the ceremony proceeded smoothly, though I noticed David discreetly checking his phone and nodding to his security team. The media presence outside was apparently growing, and arrangements needed to be made for our exit strategy. When Father Martinez pronounced us husband and wife, Marcus kissed me with such joy and relief that I forgot about everything else for a moment. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and several people actually gave David a standing ovation, as if he had performed rather than simply fulfilled a family obligation. The recessional back down the aisle was triumphant. Marcus and I practically floated on air, followed by our wedding party and David, who had somehow become an unofficial part of the procession.
Guests were openly taking photos now, and I could see phones everywhere documenting our exit. Outside the church, the scene was controlled chaos. David's security team had created a pathway through the crowd of photographers and reporters who were shouting questions and snapping pictures rapidly. I heard fragments of their questions. Mr. Chen, how do you know the bride? Is this for an upcoming movie? Julia, how does it feel to have a celebrity godfather? David handled it with professional grace, offering a brief statement to the gathered media. I'm honored to be here for Julia on her special day. She's family, and family shows up for each other. Please respect their privacy and let them enjoy their celebration. The ride to the reception venue was equally surreal. Our wedding party bus, which had originally seemed charmingly modest, now felt like a celebrity convoy with security vehicles flanking us front and back. The bridesmaids and groomsmen were giddy with excitement, taking selfies and already checking to see if photos from the ceremony had appeared online. This is insane, Sarah kept repeating, scrolling through social media. There are already articles about your wedding posted on entertainment websites. Someone got a video of David lighting the unity candle. Emma showed me her phone screen. David Chen walks goddaughter down aisle in surprise Sacramento wedding appearance. The article already had thousands of shares and comments. Marcus, who had been quiet during the ride, finally spoke up. Are you okay with all this? This isn't exactly what we planned. I considered the question seriously. Our intimate wedding had become a public spectacle. Photos of our most personal moments were already circulating online. Tomorrow, our wedding would probably be featured in celebrity gossip magazines, alongside speculation about David's presence and our family connection. But as I looked around the bus at our wedding party, Sarah and Emma still high on excitement, Tyler and the groomsmen trading stories about shaking hands with a movie star, Marcus looking at me with such love and pride, I realized that none of the external chaos mattered. I'm more than okay, I told him. Today started as the worst day of my life. My father abandoned me, I thought my wedding was ruined, and I felt completely alone. But look what happened instead. I gestured toward the front of the bus, where David was quietly making calls to ensure our reception would proceed smoothly despite the media attention. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years dropped everything and drove 3 hours to make sure I wasn't alone. He solved my family's financial crisis without being asked. He gave me away with more love and dignity than I could have hoped for. And now, our wedding story will be something we tell our grandchildren, not because of the celebrity aspect, but because of what it represents about family showing up when you need them most. Marcus smiled and pulled me closer. Plus, our wedding photos are going to be professionally documented, whether we paid for it or not, he joked, pointing to the media vehicles still following our convoy. As we approached Riverside Gardens, I could see that David's team had been busy. The venue's parking lot had been reorganized to accommodate security needs, and discreet barriers had been set up to prevent unauthorized photography of the reception area, while still allowing our celebration to proceed normally.
The next few hours would determine whether our wedding reception could maintain its intended intimate atmosphere despite the Hollywood-level attention, or whether we'd need to adapt our celebration to accommodate the new reality of public scrutiny. The reception at Riverside Gardens exceeded every expectation I'd ever had. David's team had worked magic in the short time since the ceremony, transforming what could have been a logistical nightmare into something spectacular. The string lights I'd chosen months ago now competed with professional-grade lighting equipment that made everything look like a movie set. As Marcus and I entered the reception area for our grand entrance, the 300 guests erupted in cheers that felt different from typical wedding applause. There was an electric energy in the air, as if everyone understood they were part of something extraordinary. David had positioned himself strategically near the head table, close enough to be supportive, but far enough to avoid making himself the center of attention. Our first dance to At Last by Etta James felt surreal under the enhanced lighting. Professional photographers, not the ones we'd hired, but media photographers with massive telephoto lenses positioned respectfully outside the venue perimeter, captured every moment. I could see their camera flashes through the trees, creating an almost paparazzi backdrop to our romantic moment. "How are we doing this?" Marcus whispered as we swayed together.
How are we acting normal when there are probably helicopter shots of our wedding being taken right now? I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it sounded. I think we just keep being us. The cameras can capture the outside, but they can't touch what's happening between us right here. During dinner, David gave a speech that no one saw coming. He hadn't been listed in the program, obviously, but when the best man finished his toast, David stood up and asked for the microphone. I wasn't planning to speak today, he began, his voice carrying easily across the silent reception area. But I realized there are some things that need to be said, not just for Julia and Marcus, but for everyone here who witnessed something beautiful today. He looked directly at me, his expression serious but warm. 24 years ago, my college roommate asked me to be her daughter's godfather. I said yes because Linda was my friend, but I didn't really understand what I was agreeing to. I thought it meant birthday cards and Christmas presents, maybe showing up for graduations if I was in town. The audience was completely captivated. Even the catering staff had stopped moving to listen. But Linda taught me that being a godfather means something deeper. It means being part of someone's extended family, even when geography and careers pull you in different directions. It means remembering that some promises transcend convenience or timing. David paused, and I could see emotion flickering across his features. When Linda was dying 4 years ago, she made me promise that I would always be there for Julia during life's big moments. Not as a celebrity doing charity work, but as family. Today, I tested that promise in ways I never expected. He turned to address Marcus directly. Marcus, you're not just marrying Julia, you're joining a family that shows up for each other. Even when it's complicated, even when it means dropping everything and driving 3 hours at a moment's notice. That's the standard you're inheriting, and it's the standard you'll be held to. The speech continued for several more minutes, weaving together stories about Mom's fierce loyalty, the importance of chosen family, and his hopes for our future. It was eloquent, heartfelt, and completely unrehearsed. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and the standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. But the most surprising moment came during the parent dances. Traditionally, I would have danced with my father while Marcus danced with his mother. Since Dad wasn't there, we had planned to skip that tradition entirely. But David approached me as the DJ announced the parent dance. "Would you honor me with this dance?" he asked formally. As we moved onto the dance floor to "The Way You Look Tonight," David spoke quietly so only I could hear. "Your father called me again 20 minutes ago. He's getting help, checked himself into a treatment facility in Stockton. He wanted you to know that leaving today was the hardest thing he's ever done, but he couldn't face seeing you start your adult life while he was falling apart." Tears started flowing down my cheeks, but I kept dancing. "He also wanted you to know that he's proud of the woman you've become, and that watching me walk you down the aisle on the live stream made him realize that your mother chose the right person to be your godfather." "There was a live stream?" I asked, startled. David chuckled. "My publicist set it up so your father could watch from the treatment center. He saw the whole ceremony. He saw you light that unity candle and heard your vows. He knows you're going to be okay." The revelation that Dad had witnessed the ceremony added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming day. He had abandoned me physically, but had still found a way to be present for the most important moments. It didn't excuse his actions, but it showed that even in his darkest moment, his love for me had persisted. As the evening progressed, the reception took on a magical quality that had nothing to do with celebrity presence and everything to do with community. Our guests had embraced the unusual circumstances and were creating memories that would last lifetimes. David danced with my elderly great-aunt Rosemary, who kept whispering questions about his upcoming movies. Marcus's teenage cousins had formed an impromptu fan club and were collecting autographs on wedding napkins. The cake cutting became another photo opportunity for the media positioned outside, but inside the venue, it felt intimate and sweet. Our simple 2-tier vanilla cake with buttercream roses looked modest compared to the elaborate celebrity wedding cakes featured in magazines, but it tasted like home. During the bouquet toss, something unexpected happened. As I turned my back to the group of single women gathered behind me, I noticed David discreetly making a phone call near the edge of the dance floor. His expression was serious, and I could see him gesturing as he spoke. I threw the bouquet, which was caught by my cousin Rebecca amid squeals of excitement, but my attention was on David's conversation. When he hung up, he caught my eye and nodded reassuringly, but I sensed something significant had just occurred. The evening was winding down beautifully when David's assistant approached our table with urgent whispers. David listened intently, then stood up and walked over to where Marcus and I were saying goodbye to departing guests. "We have a situation," he said quietly. "Your father just left the treatment facility. He's driving here." The news that Dad was driving to the reception hit me like a physical blow. After everything we'd been through today, the abandonment, the scrambling, the beautiful ceremony with David, the magical reception, now this. I felt Marcus tense beside me as David quickly outlined what his assistant had learned. "The treatment center called when he left without completing intake," David explained, keeping his voice low so nearby guests wouldn't overhear. "He's been driving for about 40 minutes. At this rate, he'll be here within the hour." My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Was he coming to apologize? To cause a scene? Was he drunk? The man who had left that devastating note this morning and disappeared was not in a stable mental state. Having him show up at our reception, with media still lurking outside and 300 guests present, felt like a recipe for disaster. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, instinctively moving closer to me in a protective stance. David was already coordinating with his security team through his earpiece. "We have options," he said calmly. "We can have security intercept him before he gets to the venue. We can move you and Marcus to a private location until he leaves. Or we can stay and handle whatever comes." I looked around the reception area, where our guests were dancing, laughing, and enjoying what had turned into one of the most memorable weddings any of them would ever attend. Sarah was teaching David's assistant how to line dance. Marcus's grandmother was showing my great-uncle photos on her phone. The joy in the room was palpable and genuine. "I don't want to hide," I said finally. "This is my wedding reception. These are our friends and family. If Dad wants to face me after what he did today, then he can do it here, surrounded by people who actually showed up when it mattered." David nodded approvingly. "That's your mother talking. She never backed down from difficult conversations either." We decided to continue the reception as planned, while David's security team monitored the situation. The next 45 minutes felt both endless and rushed. Every car that pulled into the parking lot made my heart skip. Every time someone approached our table, I wondered if it was news about Dad's arrival. But something remarkable happened during that tense waiting period. The reception guests, most of whom had no idea drama was unfolding, created some of the most beautiful moments of the entire day. Marcus's grandfather, who rarely spoke due to his advancing dementia, suddenly became animated during a slow song and asked me to dance. As we swayed together, he told me stories about his own wedding 70 years ago, his memory crystal clear for those precious minutes. David spent time at every table, not as a celebrity making appearances, but as a family member genuinely interested in meeting our loved ones. He listened to war stories from Marcus's veteran uncle, admired baby photos from my former coworkers, and even helped settle a good-natured argument between two of our college friends about whether our first date had been at a coffee shop or a bookstore. The normalcy of his interactions felt surreal against the backdrop of waiting for my father's dramatic arrival. But they also reinforced something David had said in his speech, that family is about showing up, being present, and caring about the details of people's lives. At 9:47 p.m., David's earpiece crackled with information. He listened intently, then looked at me gravely. "He's here, pulling into the parking lot now." Through the reception venue's large windows, I could see headlights sweeping across the parking area. A beat-up pickup truck, Dad's old Ford that he'd been driving since Mom got sick, parked in a spot far from the main entrance. For several minutes, nothing happened. The truck just sat there with the engine running. "What's he doing?" Marcus asked, squinting toward the parking lot. David's security chief, a professional-looking woman in a discreet suit, approached our table. "Mr. Hendricks has been sitting in his vehicle for 8 minutes. He appears to be on the phone. Should we approach?" Before anyone could answer, the truck door opened. Dad stepped out slowly, and even from a distance, I could see he looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his movements had the careful deliberateness of someone who was either exhausted, intoxicated, or both.
He stood by his truck for another long moment, staring at the reception venue with its glowing lights and sounds of celebration drifting through the night air. Then he began walking toward the entrance with the resigned posture of someone approaching his own execution. "Julia," David said quietly, "you don't have to do this. I can have security escort him away, and you never have to see him tonight." I watched my father approach through the window. This man who had raised me, taught me to ride a bike, scared away boys who weren't good enough for me, and held my hand through Mom's final days. The same man who had written a note saying he couldn't face my wedding and left me to deal with the aftermath alone. "No," I said, standing up from our table. "He came this far. Let him come in." The reception area fell gradually silent as guests began noticing the commotion near the entrance. Dad appeared in the doorway, backlit by the parking lot lights, looking like a ghost haunting his own daughter's wedding. He scanned the room until his eyes found mine across the crowded space. The silence stretched uncomfortably as 300 people waited to see what would happen next. Dad took a tentative step forward, then stopped, as if suddenly realizing the magnitude of his intrusion. His gaze moved from me to Marcus, then to David, who was standing protectively beside our table. When Dad finally spoke, his voice carried across the silent reception area with startling clarity. "Julia, I know I have no right to be here. I know I don't deserve to be part of this day after what I did to you this morning. But I couldn't let the sun set on your wedding day without telling you something." He moved closer, his steps uncertain but determined. "I left because I was drowning, and I thought my problems would contaminate the most important day of your life. I thought you'd be better off without a father who couldn't even afford to pay for his daughter's wedding without destroying his future." Tears were streaming down his face now, and I realized I was crying too. But sitting in that treatment center, watching you marry Marcus on that computer screen, seeing David walk you down the aisle with more dignity than I could have managed, I realized I was wrong about everything. The reception area remained completely silent, except for Dad's voice and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. "You didn't need a perfect father today. You just needed your father, and I failed you in the worst possible way." Dad's words hung in the air like a confession in church. The silence was so complete, I could hear the ice clinking in someone's drink glass 3 tables away. 300 people held their breath, waiting to see how this family drama would unfold in real time. I stood frozen beside Marcus, my wedding dress suddenly feeling heavy and constricting. Part of me wanted to run to Dad, to tell him everything was forgiven and that I understood his pain. Another part wanted to scream at him for putting me through the worst emotional torture of my life on what should have been the happiest day. But before I could move or speak, David stepped forward. "Robert," he said, his voice carrying the same authority he'd used to manage the entire crisis today. "You're right, Julia didn't need a perfect father today, but she needed something, and when you couldn't provide it, she found it elsewhere." Dad's eyes shifted to David, and I saw recognition mixed with shame cross his features. These 2 men had never met before today, but they were now connected by their shared love for me and Mom. "I know what you did," Dad said quietly to David. "Paying off the debt, the job offer, taking care of her when I couldn't. I don't know how to thank you or how to repay." "Stop." David's interruption was gentle but firm. "This isn't about money or debt or who owes what to whom. This is about a daughter who deserved better from her father today, and a father who needs to decide whether he's going to keep drowning in shame or start swimming toward shore." The metaphor landed powerfully in the silent reception hall. I could see guests leaning forward, completely absorbed in this unexpected confrontation between my biological father and my godfather. Dad took another step closer to our table, his gaze finally meeting mine directly. "Julia, I can't undo leaving you this morning. I can't take back the panic you must have felt,
or the way I made you question whether you were worth showing up for. But I can tell you the truth about why I left and what happened when I saw you getting married without me." He paused, gathering strength for what came next. "I left because I couldn't bear for you to discover on your wedding day that your father was a failure. The debt, the second mortgage, the loans, I thought I could handle it all and give you the perfect wedding your mother would have wanted. When everything collapsed this week, I realized I'd put my pride ahead of your happiness." Marcus moved closer to me, his hand finding mine and squeezing reassuringly. I could feel his steady presence, grounding me as Dad's confession continued.
But watching that live stream, seeing David walk you down that aisle with such love and dignity, seeing you light that unity candle and say your vows, I realized something that should have been obvious. You didn't need a perfect wedding funded by a financially stable father. You needed your father, flaws and all, standing beside you. Dad's voice broke slightly on the last words, and I saw several guests dabbing their eyes with napkins. I spent so much energy trying to be the father I thought you deserved that I forgot to be the father you actually had, the one who taught you to change a tire, who sat up with you during nightmares, who held you when your mother died. The mention of Mom sent a wave of emotion through me that nearly knocked me over. Marcus steadied me as tears flowed freely down my cheeks. "And now I've missed it," Dad continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I missed walking you down the aisle. I missed giving you away. I missed the most important moment in my daughter's life because I was too proud and too scared to face my own failures." The reception hall remained completely silent, but I could feel the collective emotional weight of 300 people witnessing this raw family moment. Even the catering staff had stopped moving to listen. That's when something unexpected happened. Marcus let go of my hand and walked toward my father. "Mr. Hendricks," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Marcus, your son-in-law." Dad looked stunned as he shook Marcus's hand, clearly not having anticipated this gesture of acceptance. "I want you to know something," Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly across the reception area. "Julia talked about you every day while we planned this wedding. She worried about the expense, about whether you were stressed, about making sure you felt included in every decision. She loves you, sir. Not the perfect version of you that you think she deserves, but the real you who raised an incredible woman." I watched this exchange through my tears, amazed by Marcus's grace under such extraordinary circumstances. He was handling this confrontation with more maturity than I felt capable of in that moment. "She spent months planning the father-daughter dance," Marcus added. "She picked Butterfly Kisses because she said you used to sing it to her when she was little. The song is still queued up with the DJ." The revelation hit Dad like a physical blow. His shoulders shook as tears overwhelmed him, and for the first time since he'd entered the reception, he looked directly at me with complete vulnerability. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, but in the silence of the room, everyone heard it. "Julia, I'm so incredibly sorry." This was the moment of choice. I could respond with anger, demanding accountability for the pain he'd caused. I could maintain distance, protecting myself from future disappointment. Or I could step into the grace that Marcus had just demonstrated and choose forgiveness over justice. David caught my eye and nodded almost imperceptibly, as if reading my thoughts and offering encouragement for whatever I decided. I looked around the reception hall at all the people who had witnessed this family crisis and comeback story. Our wedding guests had become unwitting participants in something far more dramatic than they'd signed up for, but their faces showed support and understanding rather than discomfort. Then I looked at Dad, standing in the middle of our reception in his wrinkled clothes with tears streaming down his face, having driven from a treatment center to publicly apologize for the worst mistake of his fatherhood. I walked toward him slowly, my wedding dress rustling with each step. The distance between us felt like miles, weighted with hurt and love and forgiveness and disappointment, all tangled together. When I reached him, I stopped just inches away and looked up into his face, the same face that had read me bedtime stories, cheered at my soccer games, and held me when I cried over teenage heartbreaks. "Dad," I said, simply, "you're here now. You're here now." Those 4 words seemed to unlock something in Dad that had been frozen since Mom died.
He collapsed into my arms with a sob that came from somewhere deep in his chest, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, comforting him after he'd had a nightmare about losing us. Except this time, his nightmare had almost come true. The reception hall erupted in applause, but it wasn't the polite clapping you hear at weddings. This was raw, emotional applause from people who had just witnessed something profound and real. As Dad and I held each other, I could hear voices calling out, "Welcome home," and "That's what family does," from our guests. When we finally separated, Dad looked around the reception with wonder, as if seeing it for the first time. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice still thick with emotion. "Everything you planned, it's perfect, sweetheart." "It wasn't perfect until right now," I replied, and meant it completely. David approached us, and I watched as these two men, one who had raised me, one who had saved me, sized each other up. Then David extended his hand to Dad. "Thank you for raising such an incredible daughter," David said. "Linda would be proud of both of you tonight." Dad shook David's hand, then surprised everyone by pulling him into a brief, fierce hug. "Thank you for being there when I couldn't. Thank you for keeping your promise to her." Marcus rejoined us, and suddenly we were a cluster of 4 people who had become family through crisis and love rather than just biology. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The father who had left, the godfather who had stepped in, the husband who had stood by me, and me in the center, holed up by all of them. "So," Marcus said, with a grin that broke the emotional tension, "does this mean we can finally do that father-daughter dance?" Dad looked at me with hope and hesitation in his expression. "If you'll have me," he said quietly. "I know David already danced with you, and I don't want to take anything away from that." "Dad," I said, taking his hand, "there's room for both of you in my life. There always has been." I looked toward the DJ booth and nodded. Within moments, the opening notes of Butterfly Kisses filled the reception hall. Dad's face crumpled again when he recognized the song, but this time his tears were mixed with joy.
As we moved on to the dance floor, Dad whispered, "I can't believe you still remember that I used to sing this to you." "I remember everything, Dad. The good and the bad and everything in between. That's what daughters do." Dancing with my father at my wedding reception felt completely different from dancing with David earlier. With David, it had been dignified and moving, a godfather fulfilling his duty with grace and love. With Dad, it was messy and imperfect and absolutely right. He stepped on my dress twice, forgot to lead during the bridge of the song, and kept apologizing under his breath. But his arms around me felt like coming home. Halfway through the song, something magical happened. David appeared beside us on the dance floor with my great-aunt Rosemary, and suddenly other couples joined in. Marcus danced with his mother, Sarah danced with her boyfriend, and even some of the older guests who hadn't moved all evening made their way onto the floor. What started as a father-daughter moment became a celebration of all the relationships that had brought us to this point. When the song ended, Dad held me close for an extra moment. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I was supposed to give this to you before the ceremony, but..." He pulled out a small velvet box that looked decades old. "This was your mother's. She wore it on our wedding day and made me promise to give it to you on yours." Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm shaped like a butterfly. It was simple and elegant, and I could picture Mom wearing it perfectly. "She said butterflies represent transformation," Dad continued as he fastened it around my wrist. "How something beautiful emerges from struggle. She wanted you to have it as a reminder that the best things in life often come after the hardest times." The bracelet felt warm against my skin, as if it carried some essence of Mom's love. I looked around the reception, at Dad, finally present and vulnerable, at David, who had dropped everything to be my family when I needed one, at Marcus, who had handled this crisis with more grace than I could have imagined, at our guests, who had witnessed and celebrated one of the most unconventional wedding days in history. Mom had been right about transformation. The rest of the reception took on a different energy after Dad's arrival and our dance. It was as if his presence had completed some missing piece, allowing everyone to relax into pure celebration.
Dad spent the next hour moving from table to table, meeting Marcus's family, catching up with relatives he hadn't seen since Mom's funeral, and accepting congratulations from friends who had worried about him for years. I watched him laugh, actually laugh, for the first time since Mom died, as Marcus's uncle told embarrassing stories about his own wedding mishaps. The sound of Dad's laughter mixed with the music and conversation and created something I hadn't heard in our family for 4 years: joy. David, meanwhile, had seamlessly transitioned from crisis manager to beloved family friend. He was deep in conversation with Marcus's grandmother about her victory garden during World War II, genuinely interested in her stories and asking thoughtful questions. Watching him connect with our extended family reinforced everything Mom had seen in him 24 years ago when she asked him to be my godfather. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing at the edge of the dance floor with Marcus, watching our guests celebrate. The media attention from earlier felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the real drama and resolution that had played out inside the reception hall. "So," Marcus said, pulling me close, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your wedding day?" I pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well, let's see. The bride was abandoned by her father. A Hollywood celebrity had to step in as a replacement. There was a media circus outside the church, and the reception was interrupted by a dramatic confrontation and public reconciliation. Don't forget the part where our wedding photos are probably already being sold to tabloid magazines," Marcus added with a grin. "Right, and the live stream that we didn't know was happening, and the security detail that made our wedding party feel like a presidential convoy." We both started laughing as we listed the absurdities of our wedding day. "But you know what?" I continued, looking around at Dad, chatting with David near the head table, at Sarah and Emma still dancing despite their heels having been abandoned hours ago, at the elderly guests sharing stories and the young cousins running between tables. I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even your dad leaving this morning? I considered that seriously. If Dad hadn't left, David might not have come. If David hadn't come, Dad might not have gotten the help he needed or found the courage to show up tonight. If none of that had happened, we would have had a perfectly lovely, completely forgettable wedding. Instead of the wedding that people will be talking about for the next 50 years, Marcus agreed. Instead of the wedding where I learned that family isn't just about who shares your DNA, or who raised you, or who's geographically convenient. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart. As if summoned by our conversation, Dad and David approached us together. Dad looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, and David had the satisfied expression of someone who had fulfilled an important obligation. "We wanted to talk to both of you before the evening ends," David said, "about what comes next." Dad nodded, looking slightly nervous but determined. "I'm going back to the treatment center tomorrow to complete the program properly," Dad said. "It's a 30-day intensive program for depression and anxiety, but after that, if the offer still stands, I'd like to take that job on your film crew." David smiled. "The offer stands. In fact, I think a change of scenery might be exactly what you need." "And Julia," Dad continued, "I know I have a lot of work to do to rebuild your trust. I don't expect forgiveness to happen overnight, and I don't expect things to go back to the way they were before. But I want to try to be the father you deserve, even if I'm starting from behind." I looked at this man who had raised me, lost his way, and found the courage to come back. The father who had taught me to drive stick shift and change a tire, who had sat in hospital waiting rooms during Mom's chemotherapy sessions, who had held my hand at her funeral and promised we'd take care of each other. "Dad, we're not starting from behind. We're starting from here, tonight, with everything we've learned about what really matters." The four of us stood together as the reception continued around us, and I realized that this was what family looked like. Not perfect, not conventional, but real and present and committed to showing up for each other. As the last guests began to leave, collecting their favors and saying their goodbyes, I took one final look around the reception venue. The string lights were still twinkling, the flowers still beautiful, the remnants of cake still sweet on dessert plates. But what I would remember most wasn't the decorations or the food or even the celebrity drama. I would remember the moment Dad walked through those doors and chose vulnerability over pride. I would remember David's speech about the chosen family and kept promises. I would remember Marcus's grace under impossible circumstances. I would remember dancing with both my fathers, the one who raised me and the one who saved me, and feeling completely loved by both. Most of all, I would remember that sometimes the worst day of your life and the best day of your life can be the same day, and that the difference lies not in what happens to you, but in who shows up to walk through it beside you. Our wedding day had started with abandonment and fear, but it ended with a family that was stronger, more honest, and more committed to each other than we'd ever been before. And as Marcus and I drove away from Riverside Gardens toward our honeymoon suite, with Dad and David following behind to continue their conversation about construction work and second chances, I knew that Mom would have loved every chaotic, beautiful, transformative moment of it. After all, she had always said that the best things in life come after the hardest times. She just never mentioned that sometimes they come on the same day. 3 months later, I received a package from Dad with a return address from Vancouver, where David's film was shooting. Inside was a photo of Dad wearing a hard hat and safety vest, grinning beside a massive movie set construction. On the back, he'd written, "Day 47 sober, building something beautiful. Thank you for not giving up on me." The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. Those first weeks after the wedding involved difficult conversations, family therapy sessions conducted over video calls, and the slow work of rebuilding trust that had been shattered. But Dad had kept every promise he'd made that night at the reception. He completed his treatment program, moved to Vancouver for the film job, and called me every Sunday without fail. David had become more than just my godfather. He'd evolved into a true family patriarch who took his role seriously. He flew Mom and Dad's old friends out to visit the film set, organized virtual family dinners when his schedule allowed, and somehow managed to remember every important date in our lives, despite his demanding career. When Marcus got promoted at his engineering firm, David sent a congratulatory bottle of champagne. When I found out I was pregnant 8 months after the wedding, he was the third person we called, right after Dad. The media attention from our wedding had eventually died down, but not before creating some unexpected opportunities. A wedding planning magazine wanted to feature our story in their Real Wedding section, focusing on how we'd handled the crisis with grace. A morning talk show invited us to discuss the importance of chosen family and mental health awareness. We declined most requests, wanting to keep our family story private, but we did participate in one interview for a mental health nonprofit, hoping Dad's story might help other families recognize the signs of depression and financial anxiety. Marcus and I had settled into married life with the deep appreciation that comes from having your relationship tested early and emerging stronger. We bought a house in Sacramento with an extra bedroom specifically designed as Dad's space for when he visited. The walls were painted his favorite shade of blue, and we hung photos from our wedding day. Not the professional shots that had appeared in magazines, but candid pictures our guests had taken of the reunion, the dancing, and the laughter that followed the tears. Our first Christmas as a married couple was magical in ways I hadn't expected. Dad flew back from Vancouver for 2 weeks, bringing stories from the film set and a much healthier perspective on life. David joined us for Christmas Eve dinner, arriving with gifts for everyone and an easy familiarity that made it feel like he'd been part of our holiday traditions for years instead of months. The most precious moment came when we were all sitting around the Christmas tree, and Dad pulled out a small wrapped package for David. "I don't know how to thank someone for what you did for my family," Dad said, his voice steady but emotional. But Linda always said that the best gifts come from the heart, not the wallet. Inside the package was a small wooden cross that Dad had carved himself during his recovery program. It was simple but beautifully crafted, with family engraved across the horizontal beam. "She made this for our first Christmas together," Dad explained to David. "She said that family was the intersection where love meets commitment. I wanted you to have something that reminded you that you're not just Julia's godfather anymore, you're part of our family permanently." David accepted the gift with the same dignity he'd shown throughout our entire journey together, but I could see the emotion in his eyes as he examined the detailed carving work. The pregnancy news had brought another layer of joy and complexity to our expanded family dynamic. Dad was going to be a grandfather, David would become an honorary great-uncle, and Marcus and I were navigating the excitement and terror of bringing a child into this unconventional but loving family structure. "What are we going to tell the baby about their grandfather?" Marcus had asked during one of our late-night conversations about the future. "We'll tell them the truth," I'd replied, "that Grandpa made a big mistake but found the courage to fix it, that family isn't about being perfect, it's about being present, and that sometimes the people who love you most show up in ways you never expected." We'd already decided that David would be known as Uncle David to our children, a title that recognized his role without diminishing Dad's place as grandfather. It was another example of how our family had learned to make space for everyone who belonged, regardless of traditional labels or expectations. The baby was due in July, and we'd already started planning a nursery that would reflect our family's journey. One wall would feature a timeline of photos: Mom and Dad's wedding, Mom holding me as a baby, family vacations from my childhood, Mom's last Christmas with us, my college graduation, Marcus's proposal, our wedding day chaos and triumph, Dad's recovery milestones, and space for all the moments yet to come.
Looking back on that October wedding day, I realized it had been the catalyst for everything good that followed. Dad's breakdown had forced our family to confront issues that might have festered for years. David's intervention had shown us what authentic love and commitment looked like. The crisis had revealed the strength of my relationship with Marcus and the depth of loyalty among our friends and extended family. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dad had simply walked me down the aisle as planned, if we'd had the quiet, traditional wedding we'd originally envisioned. Would Dad have continued struggling silently with his debt and depression until it destroyed him completely? Would David have remained a distant figure who sent birthday cards but never truly connected with our daily lives? Would Marcus and I have understood the depths of each other's character without being tested by crisis? The butterfly bracelet from Mom had become my daily reminder that transformation often requires breaking apart completely before you can rebuild something stronger. I wore it to every important event: Marcus's promotion dinner, Dad's graduation from his recovery program, David's movie premiere that we attended as his family, each doctor's appointment for the pregnancy. Our marriage had also been transformed by that wedding day experience. Marcus and I had learned to communicate through crisis, to support each other when external pressures threatened our happiness, and to make decisions as a true partnership. The challenges that might have stressed other newlywed couples, family drama, public scrutiny, financial discussions, felt manageable because we'd already navigated something much more difficult together. We'd also developed a tradition of celebrating October 15th not just as our wedding anniversary, but as Family Day, the day our unconventional family composition was officially established. Each year, we'd gather everyone together for a dinner that combined wedding cake and Thanksgiving gratitude, remembering both the crisis and the love that had brought us all together. The upcoming first anniversary was going to be special because Dad would be back from Vancouver permanently, having finished his work on David's film and secured a position with a Sacramento construction company that specialized in eco-friendly building projects. David had written a recommendation letter that opened doors Dad never could have accessed on his own, but Dad had earned the job through his renewed work ethic and positive attitude. As I sat in our living room, 6 months pregnant and surrounded by wedding photos that told the story of the most chaotic and beautiful day of my life, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for everything that had emerged from that initial devastation. Mom's death has taught me that love persists beyond physical presence. Dad's crisis and recovery had shown me that people can change and that second chances are worth giving. David's intervention had demonstrated that family obligations can become genuine relationships when honored with sincerity. Marcus's steadiness through all the drama had proven that I'd chosen the right partner for whatever adventures lay ahead. Our story had become proof that sometimes the fairy tale isn't about everything going according to plan. It's about what happens when the plan falls apart completely and you discover that love is strong enough to rebuild something even better from the pieces. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.